The young man was so excited. It was his first day at work. He arrived, got everything ready. He got his pots. He puts the pots on the harness. He put the harness over his shoulders. He left the house, walked down the path to the river. Actually, no, he almost ran down to the path in the river in his excitement, filled up the pots with water and carried them back up the hill to the big house. He did it in moments, in a flash, so quick. You see, he was the new water bearer for the big house, and he was very, very happy to have that job. Time went on, and every day the water bearer went to work, and he walked down the path to the river, filled up the pots with water, walked back up the path to the big house. And time went on, and the day arrived when the water bearer was due to retire. And he did what he always did. He arrived early, he got his pots, got them onto the harness, put the harness over his shoulders, and he walked very slowly down to the river. He could have done that walking in his sleep. He'd done it so many times. He filled the pots with water and then walked very slowly back up the hill. A little later, he was sitting under a tree, just having a rest. And he couldn't believe what happened, because one of the pots spoke to him. And the pot said, Master, can I ask you a question? And the pot bearer just sort of nodded, didn't really know what to say. And this was the question the pot asked. Why is it you've kept me all these years? You know, I'm cracked. And we walked down to the river, you fill me up, and by the time we're back up at the house, I've spilt half the water. And the pot bearer just smiled and picked up the pot and walked down towards the river. He didn't go all the way to the river. He sort of stopped about halfway and turned round and looked back up the hill to the big house. And he said to the pot, tell me what you see on your side of the path. And as they looked back up the path, on that one side were flowers and plants, flowers of all colours tumbling over each other, and plants thriving. And the water bearer said, every time we walk back up this path, you water those plants. And the way I look at it is your floor is your blessing. And I just love that. Your floor is your blessing. I thought that's one I need to hang on to. So we need another story, don't we? Sort of any stories, I started to think about it way back in January, February. So we were in the midst of lockdown here in London, or here in the UK. And this is a story that I had told before quite a few times, but it just started to take on a new meaning for me during lockdown. And it goes like this. I couldn't decide what to call the couple, though. I had George and Mildred in mind at one point, which might ring some bells with some people. But anyway, John and Anne. Well, when they first met, people thought they really wouldn't get on. And when they made plans to get married, people were amazed. And when they got married, people just whispered quietly about them, it won't last. It really won't last. I mean, there are even a few sort of almost side bets going on. You know, I give it a year, I give it 2 years. But all those people were completely and utterly wrong. Because John and Anne were married, or had been married for quite a long time. You know, they'd had children, the children had grown up and left home. And they'd settled into quite a nice routine. And then along came lockdown. Now, I said they'd always been different, you know, chalk and cheese, and there weren't many things they agreed on. So if John said, fancy a cup of tea, Anne would say, no, I'm going to make a pot of coffee. And if John said, oh, lasagna for dinner, Anne would say, oh, no, not again. Even spaghetti bolognese would be better than lasagna. And if John said, I'm going to close the windows, Anne would say, no, don't, I'm really, really hot. And during lockdown, all those little niggles just got a little bit bigger because they were home together 24 hours a day, both working from home, being told not to go out. Wow. I mean, they did go out, There was one day that John decided to go fishing. He loved fishing. And Anne was probably even more excited. You see, she would have the house to herself for the whole day. I can see some of you just know that feeling. The whole day all to herself. Just the thought of it. Well, off John went. You know, they lived by the sea. They had a little boat in the harbour, so it was easy to go fishing. And he set everything up on the boat and went out of the harbour and round the headland. That was his favourite place to fish. And he got himself organised and cast his line, and then he just sort of settled back, because for him it wasn't just about catching the fish, it was about just being out on the sea in his boat by himself, gathering his thoughts. And time just passed and he didn't catch anything. And it was getting time to go home and he still hadn't caught anything. And he was getting a bit worried, because the one thing him and Anne did agree on was that they loved a fish supper. And he so desperately wanted to catch something so they could have their fish supper. Wow. Imagine his relief when the line started bobbing just a little bit. And as he started reeling it in, he realised he was working quite hard. He realised it was a heavy fish. He realised it must be a really big fish. So imagine his surprise when the fish finally flopped into the boat, because it was tiny. And even more than that, it was the ugliest fish he had ever seen. And he sort of thought, well, better than nothing, I suppose. But the fish spoke. The fish, you can imagine, was actually really quite pissed off. Can you put me back in the water, please? You need to do it fairly quickly as well, because this isn't doing me any good at all. And John just, well, he didn't know what to do. He put the fish back in the water because that was what the fish had asked. And he just sat there for a while thinking, I've had too much sun. I think I really need to go home. And then he heard something splashing about next to the boat, and there was the fish. And the fish said, well, as you let me go, I'll grant you 3 wishes. The first 3 things you wish for when you get home will come true, but be careful what you wish for. Well, John straight away turned the boat around, headed back to harbour. All he heard was 3 wishes. He hadn't heard anything else at all. Rushed back to the house, in through the door, called to Anne. I called up a talking fish and it gave me 3 wishes. And the whole story came tumbling out. And Anne just said, whoa, hang on a minute. What happened? And he started to tell her about the talking fish and the 3 wishes. And she said, John, have you eaten today? You know, maybe you just need a cup of tea and a jam sandwich or something. You know, maybe your blood sugar's a bit low. So she made him a cup of tea and a jam sandwich, and they both sat down. She said, right, tell me what happened. And John was saying, I've told you, the talking fish gave me 3 wishes. And he looked at the jam sandwich and went, jam sandwich, I took the jam sandwich. Peanut butter would have been nice, but you know what I really wish? Really wish I could have a plate of sausages. And no sooner he said it than a plate of beautiful sizzling sausages appeared. He was delighted. You can imagine the look on Anne's face. Sausages. You've wished for sausages. You could have wished for money or, I don't know, a new car, a boat, world peace. You could have wished for anything, and you've wished for a plate of sausages. I wish those sausages were on the end of your nose. We know what happened next, don't you? That string of sausages was attached to John's nose. They gave it a bit of a pull, and gosh, it hurt. He said, no, come on, you're not going to get them off like that. So Anne gave him a really big pull. And it brought tears to John's eyes. She said, well, you know, like they do in the butchers, you know, they twist them round, don't they? It was like his nose was being twisted into his face. I mean, he cried. And Anne said, right, okay, I'll get a knife. She got the sharpest knife in the kitchen and tried to cut through the sausages, but it didn't even break the surface. Well, John looked at Anne and Anne looked at John, and there's only one thing for it, isn't it? I wish these sausages were gone. That was the end of the sausages, and that was the end of the 3 wishes. So I always used to think that that there was a good moral in that story. You know, if you ever catch a talking fish, listen to everything it has to say. You know, there might be some warnings attached to the wishes. There might be some conditions. So just make sure you listen. But I just wonder if one of the reasons that story feels really important tonight is I've just got a feeling at the moment that we're going to end up back where we started in all of this, if we're not careful. So, yeah, just back to where we started in the pandemic. And I don't think that's where any of us want to be. So we definitely need to move on really quite quickly. So I'm still in January, and it does feel like I'm in January actually, because it's really quite wet and cold and grotty at the moment. But I was very lucky in lockdown because one of the schools I work in kept me on right through lockdown. So I was working as a storyteller remotely with the children. So I was here, the teacher was in the classroom on their computer, the children were at home on their, homes, flats, wherever they lived. And we were working on the most wonderful story about fear. Just a really powerful story at the best of times, but a really powerful story in January this year. And it stuck with me, the story. And what also stuck with me a little bit is sometimes I find it a little bit scary to go outside if there's lots of people around or lots of things going on. And this is a story that I think helps me. So, see what you think anyway. Mrs. Hope was standing in the kitchen, sipping her mug of tea. It was like nectar. So it was early in the morning and no one else in the house was awake. And she was enjoying those few precious moments of quiet. She walked over to the back door and just looked out into the garden and screamed, "What on earth?" In the back garden was a dog, and it wasn't any old dog. This dog was as big as a horse. Well, she started to make plans about, what on earth could she do? It was too early to phone the council. It was too early to phone the dog warden. Well, the only thing to do was none of the family would go outside, and then they'd sort it out. Well, upstairs, Mr. Hope was waking up nicely. He just had a lovely long hot shower, like he did every morning. And he opened the bathroom window just to get a breath of fresh air. But something took his breath away, and it wasn't the cold air, it was the dog in the garden. Not just any old dog. This dog was as big as a bus. And Mr. Hope sort of yelped and threw his clothes on and ran downstairs as quickly as he could into the kitchen. And his wife was sort of pointing at the kitchen door, sort of saying, "There's a dog." And he said, I know, I've seen it. Right. And she said, it's all right, no one goes outside. I'll call the dog warden and the council in a bit. And he said, no, I'm calling the police. So he called the police and told them what was happening with this dog as big as a bus in the back garden. And the police were very nice and very patient. They said to him, what you need to do is not go outside and call the dog warden at 9 o'clock when the office opens. So that was what they decided to do. But upstairs, Kim, their oldest daughter, had been woken up. People were screaming and screeching and talking about a dog in the garden. So reluctantly, she sort of rolled out of bed and had a little look through the curtains. And she screamed, because in the garden was a dog, but this dog was eye level with her bedroom window. She jumped back into bed and pulled the duvet over her head. All the commotion woke up Ben. Now, Ben wasn't a morning person at all. He hated mornings. And this morning was particularly bad because he'd been woken up by screaming and screeching and people rabbiting on about dogs. And so he got up and in zombie mode just sort of made his way downstairs and into the kitchen. He looked out the kitchen window. I mean, he was one of those really articulate teenagers. That was sort of as good as it got, really. And because what he saw was a dog, and this dog was as big as the house. Well, the Hope family knew that they had to do something, so the sensible thing to do seemed to be to sit down to breakfast and come up with a plan. So that was what they did. They all sat down to breakfast. And so all of them, sorry, I didn't mention Little. I don't know Little's name. Everyone called her Little because she was the smallest, the youngest of the Hope family. And she didn't seem fussed at all. She just sat and ate her Rice Krispies like she did every morning. I need to say other makes of cereal are available. I've just happened to have chosen Rice Krispies right now. And the family came up with a plan. So their plan was lock all the doors and windows, draw all the curtains, nobody goes outside, and the most important of all was they would all hide behind the sofa. That was it. They knew what to do, absolutely fine. So you can imagine their surprise when after breakfast, Little got up, put on her wellies and her coat, and before they could stop her, went out of the back door into the garden. And Little looked up at the dog, and the dog looked down at Little, and Little walked past the dog down the garden, out into the lane, and when she was nearly at the wood, she shouted, "Come on then," and ran as fast as she could into the woods. Well, the dog, that huge great dog, stood up, had a bit of a stretch, watched Little go, and then bounded after her. Well, Little ran as fast as she could through the woods. She was zigzagging through the trees, this way, that way, this way. And dog was chasing after her. And Little just glanced back and the dog looked like it was having fun. So she ran towards the stream and she ran across the stepping stones and off into the woods, further into the woods. And when she looked back, the dog jumped over the stream. And the dog looked like it was having fun, and Little was starting to have fun. So she ran on, down through the woods to the pond. Now the pond was completely frozen because this was mid-winter. And Little very carefully tiptoed across the pond. And she waited on the other side and she couldn't stop laughing because dog came slipping and sliding and skidding and skating across the ice after her. And as she watched, dog was really quite funny and not very scary at all. So she ran up to the playground. She knew the playground like the back of her hand. And she got on the roundabout and started spinning round and round and round. And dog just sat and watched her going round and round and round and started to feel just a little bit dizzy. And Little was really enjoying herself. She wasn't scared at all. Dog was really good fun. So she ran out to the playground. Dog followed. She ran down the hill. Dog followed. She tiptoed across the ice. Dog followed. She ran up through the woods, over the stream. I'd forgotten the route home then for a moment. Over the stream, we're fine. We're back on track. She knows where she's going. And dog followed. She zigzagged through the trees. Dog followed. She ran up the lane to the house, through the cat flap, because she really was that little. And the dog followed. And she told dog to stay in the kitchen. And she went to find everyone. "Hello," she called. Well, the rest of the family sort of tumbled out from behind the sofa where they'd been hiding. "Oh, Little, thank goodness. We were so worried. Don't you ever do that again." Well, I thought it would be quite funny because the dog had eaten you, actually. That was her brother. "Oh, Little, what a silly thing to do." And then all four of them stopped and said to her, "Where's dog?" And Little just went into the kitchen and brought out dog. And the family looked at Little and looked at the dog and went, "Little, you're so brave. really, I mean, we've all been a bit silly, really, haven't we? And the family sat down and had a cup of tea and some biscuits, because that seemed like a good thing to do after a big adventure with a dog. And a little while later, Little and Dog sat snuggled up by the fire, just warming up. And then Little turned around and looked at her mum and dad with her big brown eyes and said, "Can we keep Dog, please?" And that's the end of that story. So I don't know, my children have got very big blue eyes when they want something. Just going to have a quick slurp of some water. So I have a confession to make. I don't know if it's quite a confession. I've started to get really, really angry about politics and politicians in the last few weeks, more so than I ever have before. And in the midst of everything that's been happening, I found this story, and I thought it is the perfect story for tonight, the perfect story to tell right now. So see what you think. The king lived as kings often did back then, in a beautiful palace. He wore the finest clothes. He was surrounded by exquisite things. He ate the best food. He drank the most expensive wine. But he always had this feeling that he was a bit lost, and he didn't know why. One evening he went out, like he often did, for a walk. I mean, I say he went for a walk. He went out in his sedan chair. I think it's a sedan chair, the one where 4 servants carry you. Is that a sedan chair? I'm hoping for a nod from someone. Anyway, he went out in a chair with 4 servants carrying him, wrapped up in blankets. He even had a hot water bottle because it was a chilly night. And as he went on his walk, he noticed that some of the people in his kingdom were homeless. Some of the people in his kingdom were begging. Some of the people in his kingdom looked like they were really, really hungry. And he thought to himself, well, I'm king, I need to do something about this. And he came up with a plan, and as soon as he got back to the palace, he called his chief advisor and said to his chief advisor, yes, on my walk, I noticed that people are hungry and they're homeless, and they just need a bit of a hand, something to get them out of this, where they're stuck. And I can do that. We can do that. I'll give them my palaces. I'll keep one for me, but I'll give them my palaces. And the advisor said, "Oh, Your Majesty, as always, a wonderful idea. But I'm very aware it's quite late, and let us talk about this in detail tomorrow. Why don't you retire for the evening?" And he handed the king a bowl of forget-me-nots. And the king took one like he always did and ate the forget-me-nut, and off he went to bed. And the next morning, when the king and his chief advisor met, the king said, yes, I remember vaguely that we were going to talk about palaces this morning, but I can't remember the details. And the advisor said, well, it's lucky I'm here, Your Majesty. I remember all the details. Your plan was to build a new palace. You wanted to add to your property portfolio, and we thought it'd be nice to build a palace up by the lakes. It'd be lovely up there in the summer. And the king said, no, that doesn't ring a bell. That's not quite what I remember. I'm sure it was something else to do with palaces. The advisor said, well, I don't remember anything else that you've mentioned, Your Majesty. Said the king, well, in that case, yes, you take care of the details. And that was what the advisor always did. The advisor took care of the details, and he handed the building contract to his brother, because that was what he always did. Now, you might be wondering about forget-me-nots. And I must admit, I've never heard of them before, and I've never seen one, I've never tasted one. I'm reliably told that they're actually a fruit, a very, very bitter fruit. And if you eat a forget-me-not, the clue's in the name, you forget anything that's made you sad, anything that's made you angry. And And you also forget anything that might be on your conscience. If you're feeling a little bit guilty about something, you won't remember it. So, back to the story. While the king lived in luxury, as you already know, some of the people in his kingdom didn't. And one of the families, it was Petra's family, one of the families were really, really struggling. I mean, they had each other, but they had very little else. So on that really snowy night, on another really snowy night, they were snuggling up around a tiny fire, sheltering next to a wall, when Petra stood up and said, I've had enough of this. I've really had enough. I'm going to go and see the king. And her family tried to talk her out of it. They said, well, you know what, you're just a commoner and the king's not going to talk to you. She said, I don't care, I've got to try. And off she went to the palace. Well, she didn't get in. And she didn't know what to do, so she just sat down for a little while in the snow, just to have a think. And that was where Princess Catherine found her, half frozen to death. So Princess Catherine took Petra into the palace and sat her next to the fire, wrapped her in some blankets and gave her a hot drink as Petra started to come round a bit. What on earth are you doing? You could have frozen out there. She said, well, I had to do something. My family is starving. We've got nowhere to live, and we're not the only ones. You know, the king needs to be helping his people. I know, said Princess Catherine, I know exactly what you're saying, but he's only interested in building palaces, and even that doesn't make him happy. He's completely lost. But as the two girls sat there, the coals in the fire just shifted around and they spoke. You need to find the key of memory. And the two girls just sort of looked at each other, and Petra said, I was in the snow for too long. I'm just hearing voices. And Princess Catherine said, it's not just you, I heard it as well. So the next morning, the two girls set off in search of the key of memory. I mean, they didn't know what it looked like, they didn't know where to start. As the day went on, the king got more and more worried because Princess Catherine was missing. You know, breakfast, lunch, dinner, absolutely no sign of her. And he knew she'd run away. And he thought it was his fault, you know, he should have done more. He didn't tell her that he loved her. You know, all these things going through his mind. And that evening, his advisor handed him the bowl of forget-me-nots, said, Your Majesty, I'm sure she will return tomorrow. Have one of these. So he did. And the next morning when he woke up, he knew something important was missing, but he didn't know what it was. Another evening passed, another night passed, and the next morning, the king thought he'd lost something, but he wasn't sure. And by the next day, the king just had this vague feeling that something was missing. In the meantime, Princess Catherine and Petra were looking for the key of memory. I mean, they started in what they thought was the most obvious place. They went to see the locksmith. And the locksmith just laughed at them. Key of memory, unlocking memories. I mean, what on earth are you talking about, you two? How ridiculous. I think you need to go and get your heads tested. So Princess Catherine and Petra did take him at his word. They went to see the head doctor. But there was a long wait for that, over a year. And they thought, I don't think we're in the right place anyway. And as they were walking along a few days later, I mean, they'd looked all over the place. They happened to be passing the blacksmith's forge. And it was a horrible day. It was snowing, it was windy. And there was something about the heat of the forge that just drew them in. Can we come in and just warm up for a minute, they asked. Well, of course you can, said the blacksmith, but what on earth were you two doing out on a day like today? Well, we're trying to find the key of memory. And they were ready for him to laugh and he looked at them. Pardon? We're trying to find the key of memory. I am having such a weird day, said the blacksmith. Last night, I was dreaming about the key of memory. It's all I can think about. I came to the forge this morning. I got the fire and everything going, and it's like my hands are working themselves, and I've made this key. And I think it's the key of memory. I think it's what you're looking for. And he gave it to the girls. They said, what do we do now? He said, I don't know. Just, I've made it. And just then the coals in the fire shifted again. Find the unhappiest place in the kingdom, and there you shall unlock the king's memories. But be warned, there will be sadness and grief. That's quite warning, actually, isn't it? But it didn't put the two girls off. I mean, the blacksmith just thought, the blacksmith was, when he heard the coals talking, I need to stop drinking. But anyway, as I say, it didn't put the girls off. They, unhappiest place in the kingdom. Well, they went to the Bridge of Boxes first. Beautiful old bridge, but it got its name because people lived in boxes under the bridge because they didn't have anywhere else to go. And the girls thought that was a really unhappy place, and it was. But they couldn't find anything that fitted the key. They went to the prison, lots of locks, lots of very unhappy people, but nothing fitted the key. They went to see Petra's family. Petra had always thought that was an unhappy place, but her family was so delighted to see her. Nothing to fit the key. So they made their way back to the palace, and there they found the king, sitting under a tree, luckily sitting on a box. And Princess Catherine and Petra went over to the king. And Princess Catherine said hello to her father, and the king just looked at her and said, I think I used to have a daughter. Well, Princess Catherine and Petra told the king the whole story. And the three of them together unlocked the box he'd been sitting on. It was the box of memory. Hundreds and hundreds of memories came flying out. And the king collapsed to the floor because the memories did bring sadness and grief. But they also made him realise something needed to be done. The king, Princess Catherine and Petra worked absolutely tirelessly. The first job, I like this one, was that they executed the chief advisor and his brother. I got a thumbs up for that one. They didn't cut down the forget-me-not trees, but they did point out to people not to eat them anymore. And then they gave all the royal palaces, apart from one, the smallest one, to the people that really needed them. And the palaces changed beyond all recognition. The palace gardens, wow, where the peacocks walked on the lawns, they now shared the lawns with chickens. The flower beds became vegetable patches. The horse stables became barns for cows and pigs and sheep. And inside the castle, that was the same. It changed so much as people moved in who needed a home and who needed food and who just needed a bit of a hand to get started. All the rooms in the palace became things like shops, schools, workshops, offices. And the palace kitchens fed these flourishing communities. And the king realised that if you gave someone a roof over their head and somewhere they felt like they belonged, they could achieve anything. And that is the story of Forget-Me-Nots. Although I need to add just a tiny little bit on the end. Because when I've started to get very angry with politicians, and I did think that maybe Forget-Me-Nots were the snack of choice at Downing Street. Boris Johnson's got his bowl of Forget-Me-Nots, and in a cabinet meeting they're sort of passed around, and amazingly all the politicians seem to remember all their successes and forget all their failures. I don't think there's a guilty conscience there anywhere. Anyway, so that's me getting a little bit political for the first time. So, right, sorry, quick sip of water. And then, you know what, I think I'm just going to go for a story that I love to tell. There might be hidden meanings for you, but I'm going to leave that up to you. This is just a story that I absolutely love to tell. And I seem to be on a bit of a theme of kings and emperors and things like that at the moment, so let's go with it. Once upon a time, there was a king. And the king had 12 daughters. Each daughter was beautiful, but the youngest daughter was the most beautiful of all. And that wasn't the only thing that made her different from her sisters. She absolutely hated being a princess. You know, just life in the palace where everybody looked at her all the time and she had to be on her best behaviour. She hated it. She would hide behind her sisters. She was scared of saying the wrong thing. She always made her sisters talk for her. And to have to wear such nice clothes all the time and not get them dirty and not do anything, it just wasn't what she wanted to do. And as often as she could, she would escape the palace. And her favourite place to go was for a walk in the woods, because it was quiet there. And just being amongst the trees was just so calming. You know, just getting out of the house and going for a walk and the bird song. Oh, she absolutely loved it. And there was a favourite place that she often went. See, in these woods was a very, very old oak tree, hundreds of years old. And when she sat under that oak tree, she felt when the leaves and branches reached out in all directions, she felt it was sheltering her from the world. And she could just sit there and do nothing, really, say nothing, not have to worry about anything. And one day she sat there, rolling around her golden ball in her hands. A ball of solid gold. So, I mean, it weighed quite a lot, but she just loved the feel of rolling it around in her hands. But then something made her jump, and she dropped the ball, and the ball rolled away into the pond before she could catch it. I mean, she tried to. She jumped up, and she even sort of splashed around a bit in the water, trying to find it, but the ball was gone. And she was devastated. I mean, not just because it was something that she loved, but because she was so worried about what her father would say. She could hear it already. You need to look after your things. We're the custodians for future generations. You should take better care. And the more she thought about it, the more upset she got. And the more upset she got, the more she cried. And then she heard a sort of noise next to her, and she looked around. And all she could see was a frog, a smelly, slimy frog. And then the frog spoke. Frog was trying to look really important. Excuse me, princess, I just wonder why you are so upset. Can I help? And the princess just sort of looked at the frog. You are talking, aren't you? Yeah, I'm just wondering why you're so upset and if there's anything I can do to help at all. Ah, said the princess, I wish you could. I've lost my golden ball and it's rolled away into the pond, and if I don't get it back, I don't know what my father's going to say, and it's gone. It's gone. I think I can probably help you with that. But what would you give me in return? And the princess said, well, anything at all. You know, I'll give you, I could give you fine clothes. Oh, not much use to a frog. I could give you money. Not much use to a frog. I could give you jewels, or not much use to a frog. Okay, then what would you like? And the frog said, well, you know what, actually it's a little lonely here living by this pond, and I'd quite like to come and live in the palace. You know, it's just, I could be your friend. We could have dinner together and drink wine together, and and I could stay in your room. And the princess just was, would have agreed to anything, I think, at that point. She was so desperate to get that golden ball back. Excuse me. So she said to her, yes, anything, I promise you, anything you want. So the frog just sort of hopped off and dived into the pond and came back with a ball in its mouth, spat it at the princess's feet, and she sort of picked it up and wiped it off, and she ran back to the palace, leaving that poor frog behind. Well, that night at dinner, the princess sat at the table, very grand table, with all her sisters and her father eating dinner. And there was a very strange sort of slurpy, sloppy noise outside the door. And then a knock at the door. Excuse me. Princess, youngest princess, came the voice. And the princess got up and answered the door, and there was the frog. So she slammed the door and sat back down at the table. And the colour had drained from her face. And the king looked at her and said, who was at the door? She said, oh, no one, it was the wind, no one at all. I think she was a bit worried what the king would say about a frog living in the palace. Maybe that was it, I'm not sure. But then there was another knock at the door, and the king heard quite clearly that someone was calling for the youngest princess. Who is at the door? He asked his youngest daughter. Well, it's a frog, a talking frog. I mean, they believed her. I'm not quite sure how she got away with it then. And I promised the frog that it could come and live here because I lost my golden ball, and the frog got the ball back for me, and the whole story came sort of tumbling out. And the king said, well, a promise is a promise. You know what you have to do. He spoke like that, this king. So the princess got down from the table and went over and opened the door, and there was the frog. So she picked up the frog and carried it back to the table and sort of put it next to her plate and tried very hard to ignore it, but the frog was having none of that. Princess, like some dinner. So the princess had to feed the frog her dinner. I mean, she couldn't eat. She felt sick. And then she had to give the frog her wine. I mean, she couldn't drink from the glass anymore. So once dinner was finished, she very quietly got down from the table and tried to sneak out of the dining hall. Well, the frog was having none of it. Princess, don't forget me. A promise is a promise. She went back to the table and picked up the frog and carried it back to her room and put the frog in the corner furthest hid. Princess, it's awfully drafty here in the corner, and it's a little bit lonely. Perhaps I could sleep on your pillow? Well, she had promised. So she got up and picked up the frog and carried it over and put it on the pillow as far away from her as possible and turned the other way and tried very hard to hide. Princess, I'd like a kiss goodnight, said the frog. Well, the princess sat up in bed and picked up the frog and looked at the frog. This frog had followed her back to the palace. This frog had eaten her dinner. This frog had drunk her wine. This frog was in her room, was sleeping on her pillow, and now this frog wanted a kiss. No, what would anyone else do? Would anyone else kiss the frog? Oh, no. Oh, I'm getting a yes and a no at the same time. Okay, wow. She looked at the frog. It had eaten her dinner, drunk her wine, and now it wanted a kiss. And she threw the frog against the wall with all her might. That was the end of the frog. And I'm really tempted to leave the story there, but I'm just wondering if anyone needs a happy ending. Oh, you do? So you're not going to kiss the frog, but you'd like a happy ending. Is that how it works? Okay, cool. All right. So the frog hit the wall. That was the end of the frog. But where the frog had landed stood a rather handsome young man. Well, the princess, and it turned out he was a prince, didn't get much sleep that night because they were getting to know each other. And I've heard they fell in love, got married, and lived happily ever after. Excellent. So we did need a happy ending. Lovely. I've got one more story. So I can't believe how quickly time's gone, actually. Although I've slightly lost track of time with our slightly late start. Sorry about that, everyone. Yes, my last story. So let me just have a quick slurp of water, sorry. So the emperor was standing on his balcony, looking out over his kingdom. There was only one thing he was thinking about. Now, you might think it was state business. You might think it was about the harvest. You might think it was about trade deals. No, the emperor was only thinking about one thing. And that one thing was clothes. That's all he ever thought about. He was absolutely obsessed with clothes. And he was trying to decide which pair of pajamas to wear to bed that evening. Well, the next morning he got up, and his days were often very, very similar. He got up and spent a little while deciding what to wear for breakfast. And then he spent a little while admiring himself in his mirror. After breakfast, he returned to his rather large walk-in wardrobe to decide what to wear for the morning, all the morning business. And when he'd finished his meetings, he returned to his dressing room to change for lunch. And after lunch, he then needed to change into another outfit for the afternoon meetings and spend time admiring himself in the mirror, of course. And then he needed to get changed for dinner. And dinner was often the time when he wore his most extravagant outfits. And then after dinner, he needed to change into something a little bit more comfortable. And then he needed to change into his pajamas for bed. And all of those changes were accompanied by an awful lot of standing in front of the mirror, admiring himself and thinking, I truly am a very handsome man. Now, the people in his kingdom loved their emperor. I mean, he was all right as emperors go. But his obsession with clothes meant that the whole country flourished. I mean, the silk farms could barely grow enough silk, and the weavers were permanently busy. And the tailors would often say that there weren't enough hours in the day. Well, one day, two strangers arrived in the city, which wasn't unusual. One was a tailor and one was a weaver, which again wasn't unusual. But what was unusual was the fabric that they talked about, their magic fabric. And they talked about how their magic fabric had the most amazing colours that blended together, how it had a wonderful sheen when the fabric moved. But more than that, they talked about how the fabric was truly magic, because anyone that was stupid or wasn't good at their job couldn't see the fabric. Well, word spread through the city, and very soon the emperor found out about the weaver and the tailor and summoned them to the palace. Now, I've called them a weaver and a tailor, but you probably know the story, you probably know this already. They were con men. They were the ones that put the word con in the term con men. I mean, they could sell sand to someone who lived in the desert. They could sell rain to the English. They could even sell PPE to the government, but then I've heard that's not very difficult. But the emperor was so impressed with their sales pitch that he hired them straight away. He offered them a fortune to make them an outfit for his birthday. He gave them a room in the castle. They said all they needed was a loom and a dressmaker's table and a dummy and scissors and things like that. And the king set them up with everything they needed. And each morning, the weaver and the tailor arrived, went into the room, locked the door, and all that could be heard for the rest of the day was the noise of the loom or them working. And when they'd finished their day's work, they'd lock the door and go home. And then they'd come back the next day and the next day and the next day. But the emperor started to get really, really curious. And he didn't want to go himself. You know, you might think he was a little scared. He sent one of his advisors. And the advisor was shown into the room by the weaver. And the advisor looked at the loom and the dressmaker's table and the dressmaker's dummy and looked all around. I couldn't see the fabric anywhere. Well, the advisor started to panic. But the weaver helped him out and said, no, just look at the loom. Look at the way these patterns merge and shift and merge and shift. And it was like the advisor had been hypnotized. Oh, I see it. Yes, I see what you're describing in the colors. And he rushed back to the emperor and said to the emperor, oh, beautiful, beautiful. The colors merge. Well, the emperor was very, very pleased, as you can imagine. But he was also quite impatient. So a few days later, he sent another advisor. And the advisor went into a room. This time it was a tailor. You can see, can't you, how wonderful this fabric is? And the advisor looked around thinking, no, I can't see anything. I must be stupid or bad at my job, because that's what they say about this fabric. If you can't see it, you're stupid or you're bad at your job. What am I going to tell the emperor? Well, the tailor carried on helping out and said, can you see when I move the material like this, the sheen on the fabric seems to swim before your eyes. And the advisor could see it somehow. And went running back to the emperor and said, oh, the fabric is beautiful. It shimmers and swims before your eyes. Your outfit will be beautiful. Well, about a week later, it was the emperor's birthday. So he made his way to the room where the weaver and the tailor worked and walked in and looked where the weaver and the tailor was standing, showing him his new outfit. And the emperor couldn't see anything. There was nothing there. He thought, I must be stupid or bad at my job or both. What am I going to do? Well, the weaver and the tailor started working their magic. Look at the fabric, the way the colours float into each other, the way it shimmers. And when you put it on, because they helped him dress, when you put it on, it feels like you have nothing on. The fabric is so light. And the emperor started to see what they were talking about. And when he was ready in his wonderful new outfit, his birthday parade began. Honestly, so much pomp and ceremony. He paraded through the streets, flanked by his entourage and anyone who was anyone. And the people had gathered to see the emperor. They wanted to see his new outfit. They'd heard about this magic cloth. And they shouted and called to the emperor his birthday wishes. And they told him how handsome he was. They told him how wonderful his new outfit was. Oh, the excitement. And then a little voice in the crowd, it's one of the children, looked at the emperor and said, he's got nothing on. And the people, don't listen to how silly. But then when the people looked, they started to realize that the emperor had nothing on. And the whispers spread through the crowd. And the emperor heard what they were saying. And he realized that he truly was stark bollock naked. But the emperor was a true showman, a true professional. And he continued the parade wearing nothing but his birthday suit. You see, the show had to go on. The show will go on. And the show has gone on because we're all here tonight listening to some stories. So thank you very much, everyone. I hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you, Hannah. And a round of applause for Hannah Need. Fantastic. And I must say this before we go any further, that it wasn't Arlie's fault. The internet gremlins got down to Marrakesh, they wrecked Ali's internet, and he was fighting it for hours to get this show on the road. So a round of applause for Ali for finally making it and getting it all together.
Thank you, Ali.
Persistence, my man, persistence, fantastic. Brothers in arms. So anyway, so it's been fantastic. I've been thinking about Wandsworth because that's where the Fringe is. And I used to live in Wilcox Road, which ran in those days from South Lambeth Road to Wandsworth Road and had a street market in. And I mean, this was late 60s, and I'd be walking down, and I used to walk down to Wandsworth. And why I'm saying this is that there's somewhere I'd love to know, that must be full of stories. And I know it's all dual carriageway now, but there used to be a huge yard, and I can't remember where all the barrow boys took their barrows, or whether it was where the rag and bow men took their carts and horses, because I just got this. I mean, what I've got is this image of the coloured carts. So whether it's the barrows or the rag and bowman's carts, but that's somewhere. In North, well, it'd be North Wandsworth, because it'd be on Wandsworth Road. It was off Wandsworth Road. It won't be there now because they'll put dual carriageway through it. But you know, I wish when I was 19 or 20 or 21, whatever I was 21 when I was living there, I had been interested in storytelling, because that yard would have been full of stories. But it might be worth, just for, you know, there's something that Wandsworth Arts Fringe might like to just explore. Wilcox Road itself had a little street market which closed in the 70s, and they knocked down the house I was living in, but it was due for demolition anyway. That's why we were there. But anyway, thank you very much. Coming up on Friday, we now have 4 tellers. I had 3 at the beginning of this program. I've now got 4. I've got Norman Perrin from Canada, and Ali, I will send you this 4th person's name to add in, because you know, you can't guess these things. We've now got Norman Perrin from Canada, David Thompson from Austin in Texas, Janina Vigas from UK, and now we've got Gatanjali Javed from India, who's going to she's going to tell us a folk tale. She'd like to share a folk tale from India on Friday for our children's program. So I think we go around the world for adults. There's no reason why we shouldn't go around the world for our children's stories. So that's Friday. And then, of course, on Sunday, it's our worldwide story round, which everybody is welcome to come and tell a story. But for now, another huge round of applause for Hannah Need.
Oh,
marvelous, and thank you, Ali, for providing the magic carpet.
Yes, thank you, and huge thank yous from me for having me at World Storytelling Cafe. So thank you very much, and also to Wandsworth Arts Fringe. And if you're not local to Wandsworth, there's lots of things going on online as well for the next 10 days. So, yeah. And
I must say this, and Hannah, for your benefit, just as you were announcing the first story, the Facebook Live came up. So all they missed was my announcement, and everyone knows what my announcement's like, so it's no problem. The Facebook is complete. We will cut the first quarter of an hour of silence or me making sarcastic comments about Ali off the front of the thing before it's put up properly. But for now, thank you very much, Hannah.
Thank you very much.
Marvellous. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Hannah.
Night.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Leave meeting. I'll send you that name, Ali. I'll do that when I finish.
Okay, thank you, John, so much.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Ali, me.